The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger. Chapter 5, Part 5. Gowiz then led me to one of their dwellings, pointed out a bed of nice dry rushes, and invited me to make myself comfortable until he should come again to conduct me into the presence of their chief, Zwitch, as was the name he bore. Bulger and I didn't wait for a second bidding, for we were tired to the bone after our long tramp. With half a dozen or more bows, quite as low as those made by Gowiz and his companions, I began to make ready for a night's rest. For a moment or so, I stood watching the retreating figures of these extraordinary people who, in single file, swiftly and noiselessly, like so many phantoms, had flitted away from the spot. Then, throwing myself down on the bed of rushes, called out to Bulger to lie down by me. But he was not so trustful as I, and after caressing my hands, took up his position at the door of the dwelling, so as to save his little master from any treachery on the part of the phantom people. Day now went out suddenly, like a lamp quenched by the wind. Bulger refused to sleep, but I, sheltered from the night dews by this thickly thatched roof, soon fell into a deep and refreshing sleep, out of which Bulger found it difficult to arouse me, for I had a faint recollection of having felt him scratching at my arm for several moments, ere I could shake off the fetters of sleep which held me bound so tightly. Sitting up hastily, I discovered that Bulger was patrolling the floor in a state of great excitement, pausing ever and anon to sniff the morning air, which, it was plain to be seen, brought him a warning of some kind. Instantly it occurred to me that wild beasts were prowling about in the neighborhood. I examined the priming of my firearms. Bulger looked well pleased to see that I was thoroughly aroused as to the threatening danger. He now grew bolder, and springing out into the open air, made a circuit of the dwelling, only to return with bristling hair and growling out of his suspicion that all was not right. His ever-increasing anxiety now began to cause me genuine alarm. I was upon the very point of making a hasty retreat to my vessel when the thought flashed through my mind, "What? Escape these swift-footed phantoms? It were idle to attempt it." So I determined to take my chances, come what might. The hut was strongly built, and its roof would at least protect us from a flight of poisoned arrows. While I was occupied in making a hasty survey of the place, a loud outcry from Bulger startled me. I gave one look, and a shiver of fear zigzagged through my body. An armed band was full in sight. With fierce shouts, deep and rumbling, they came nearer and nearer. Their massive forms swayed from side to side. Their huge limbs moved like walking oaks. Their arms seemed the sturdy branches ending in hands which, in the dim morning light, took the shape of gnarled and knotted knobs. Terrific strength was shadowed forth by their broad and heavy shoulders. One blow from a hand of such sledgehammer weight would lay a frail creature like me helpless in the dust. Bulger, brave as he was, quailed at the sight. In an instant I collected my thoughts and breathed a last goodbye to the elder baron and to the gentle baroness, my mother, in their faraway home beneath the northern skies. Now they had reached the very doorway and stood beating their huge chests and giving forth deep, rumbling sounds. Instinctively, I unsheathed my poniard and brandished it in the air. The effect was astounding. With terrific cries, groans, and shouts, they fell back in the wildest terror, rolling over each other, bounding asunder like gigantic footballs, striking the earth and bounding into an erect position. When at last these human airbags settled down into something like rest, one of their number broke out into the most plaintive and beseeching speech, which I afterwards learned had about the following meaning. "O master, O magician, O mysterious lump, O impenetrable chunk, put away that dread instrument, prick us not with its awful point, pierce not our delicate skins. The slightest touch from that frightful blade would cause our bodies to burst like pricked balloons. Fear us not, we are thy friends. we come to conduct thee to our great chief Twist. I am Go Wiz, thy slave. Suddenly the truth broke upon my wondering mind. There was no falsehood in the speaker's words. It was Go Wiz. The others were his companions, the wretched, woe-begone bags of bones who had parted with me only the day before. With a smile and gentle wave of the hand, I hastily returned my dagger to its sheath and gave Go Wiz to understand that he had nothing to fear from me. Half crazed with curiosity, I now advanced to take a closer look at Go Wiz and his companions. Sober fact is it when I tell you what they were, man for man, the self-same beings I first fell in with on my starting out to explore the island. But this wonderful change, you ask, how had they in one short night grown to such Herculean build? Arms and limbs as massive as those of Japanese wrestlers. I reply, it was all air. When I first met these gentlemen, they had not dined. Now they had just come from a hearty meal. For you must know that I was now in the land of the wonderful wind eaters. When the air is calm and the winds asleep, these curious people are obliged to fast, and their skins hang in wrinkled bags, as I have described. But when the wind starts up for a mad frolic or even a gentle puff and blow, these strange creatures at once begin to increase in size, and not long it is before every wrinkle and crease disappears like magic. As Go Wiz and his companions stood before me, I was struck by the ridiculous contrast between their voices and the expression of their faces. Yesterday, with their fierce and forbidding faces, their voices were soft and flute-like. Today, their voices were terrible, deep, and rumbling, while their faces, now puffed out smooth and round, seemed wreathed in smiles and good humor. As I stood lost in wonder at the sight of these strangely transformed beings, Go Wiz rumbled out something which I easily understood to be a request that I should permit him to conduct me to the residence of his great chief, Twitch. I smiled assent and set about gathering my traps. Bulger was completely nonplussed and fixed his lustrous eyes upon me as much as to say, "Dear little master, how canst thou trust thyself to these huge mountains of flesh, a single one of whom could crush thy frail body as easily as I would a mouse?" I gave him a few caresses and stroked his silken coat to let him know I was sure that I was right. Go Wiz and his band, clumsy as they seemed, were by no means slow of pace. They moved forward at a brisk rate, for the air was calm and they had little to carry. Now and then, upon bumping together, they bounded apart like rubber balls. It was a difficult thing for me to keep from laughing, especially when I saw Bulger's look of utter perplexity. He rolled his eyes up at me in the most comical manner. However, at last we entered the village of the Wind Eaters, where the great chief Twitch held his court. He too was puffed out pretty round, although, as I afterwards learned, the laws of the land do not allow him to eat as heartily as his subjects. Here and there a wrinkle was visible. His face and arms did not have that look of puffy tightness common to his people after a hearty meal. He had already been fully informed of my arrival on his island and of my extraordinary weight and hardness for my size. It took about 15 of the Wind Eaters to balance me in the scales. Chief Twitch received Bulger and me with the greatest kindness. I was at once presented to his ministers of state and to the members of his family. Queen Fuyu was a very stately dame, dignified and reserved in her manners, but the little princess, Pufa, charmed me with her childlike curiosity. Their excellencies, the ministers of state, stood behind their master and seemed intent upon giving him far more advice than he was willing to listen to. Their names were Hissa, Wurwur, and Shaboom. You may well imagine the excitement created in the home of Chief Swish by my arrival. From the highest to the lowest, from chief to serving man, everyone begged and implored to be allowed to feel me. Anxious to make a favorable impression upon the strange people so that I might have a good opportunity to study them at my ease, I submitted good-naturedly for an hour or more to being patted, pinched, prodded, rubbed, and stroked. It were vain for me to attempt to give you any idea of the 1,001 outcries of surprise, delight, wonder, fear, anxiety, and dread, which went up from this multitude of strange beings, who were, although they didn't seem to think so, quite as great curiosities to me as I to them. My stock of dried fruit was now quite exhausted, and I began to feel the gnawings of hunger. I was always blessed with a splendid appetite, and the pure, bracing air of this island only added to it. Bulger, too, I could see, was casting inquiring glances about in search of some signs of kitchen arrangements. I made known to Chief Zwitschwitsch, as well as I could, the state of affairs, and he at once summoned Hissa, Werwer, and Shaboom to his side for consultation. They held a most animated discussion, and one too which ran from quarter hour to quarter hour without any sign of coming to an end. All this time my poor stomach was wondering what had cut off the customary supplies. Like rulers the world over, Chief Zwitschwisch was impatient and self-willed. Finally, he lost his temper completely and moved about so vigorously that his 3 ministers were kept continually on the bounce, so to speak. If you can only wait long enough, everything comes to an end. I was finally bidden to approach the chief, who asked me whether I had, since my arrival on his island, seen anything which I could eat. I was obliged to confess that I had not. Whereupon there was another consultation which ended in Zwitschwisch seizing his corkwood club and sending each one of his ministers in a different direction with 3 quick, smart blows. The sight was so ludicrous that I would willingly have let my dinner go for a chance at the bat myself. Suddenly an idea came to me. I could see that this settlement of the wind-eaters was not far from the seashore. So as best I could, I made Chief Zwitschwisch comprehend that I could eat the oysters and other shellfish, of which I had noticed vast quantities lying on the white sands of the ocean. When the thing was made thoroughly plain to them that I proposed to satisfy my hunger by devouring such horrid and disgusting creatures as lived between those shells, I was really alarmed at the consternation it caused. Queen Fuyu and Princess Pufal were taken ill and withdrew to their apartments in great haste, while one and all, even including the fierce Go-Wiz, were seized with symptoms of nausea. By degrees, however, they recovered, and orders were issued to 6 serving men, who, not being gorged, were in good marching condition to set out for the shore and bring a supply of the shellfish to appease my hunger, which by this time had really set its teeth in my vitals. And we're going to pause here, and we'll continue with this story in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.